Good to see everyone here this afternoon. Good to see an old troublemaker. You've been missed. She says she can't hear anything from back there, so I think I'm going to switch my sermon to preach a sermon about Nelda this afternoon. It's good to see Brother Worley as well. I hope I get the name right. Dina. She was here this morning to worship with us. A couple of us have went to see her, Sister Brantley and Louise, not Lucille. And set her up with a Bible correspondence course. She's already taken the first one. She's taking the second one. Let's keep this good woman in our prayers. She has a lot of kids that she also is taking care of at this time. But let's pray for her that she will open her heart to the Word of God and will learn more and eventually obey, because that's what it's all about. In James chapter 1, verse 19, James tells us that we are to be slow to hear, swift to speak, and really fast to give into anger. Well, not exactly. However, that is exactly how the world responds. It's very slow to actually hear what someone else has to say anymore, if they listen at all. And generally, they are too quick to interrupt and tell us what they think when we haven't even finished explaining what we want to talk about. And as far as rage, I don't know if I've ever seen it in this country where people will get into such a rage over nothing. At the drop of a hat, as the saying goes. Road rage is just that. People will kill another person just because they got cut off. And then after the damage has been done and they're sitting in prison, they'll have time to realize what a terrible mistake that they made. But just rage. Well, that passage, as we all know, states, "Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath." God gave us 2 ears, and those ears are unhindered. In other words, they're open. And he's given us one tongue, and that is hemmed in by teeth, top and bottom. I think God's trying to tell us something. This would be a better world, without a doubt, if people were actually quick to hear what someone else has to say. But not be in a hurry, but be slow to speak, to ponder what we really want to say in response to a question. And extremely slow to give into anger or wrath. Swift to hear. The American Standard Version reads a little different. It starts off with, "Ye know this." So they had been taught this before, of course. But then there's also the phrase, "let every man be," and that word "be" is an imperative. So James is commanding us to do what is written down in this verse. This is not open to suggestion. This is not a take it or dismiss it. This is something that all of us must do. And if we do these things, we will know what manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness. 2 Peter 3, verse 11. There is an old adage, an old saying, And I have heard that this may go back to the ancient Greeks. Speech is silver, silence is golden. And of course, gold is much more valuable than silver. But the key, silence is golden. In most cases, we are able to get ourselves in more trouble with our mouth open than when it's closed. What should we be quick to hear, though? Quick to hear. Quick to listen to. First and foremost, it's God's holy word. And even it tells us, faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God, Romans 10:17. Faith comes about by hearing God's word. That's where it starts. When we begin to read it, when we begin to listen to it being taught. If we listen to it with the proper understanding, it will lead us to what we need to do. Who listened to Jesus in his 3.5-year ministry? Who are the ones who really wanted to hear what he had to say? Well, in Luke chapter 15, verse 1, it tells us, Then drew near unto him all the publicans and sinners for to hear him. Those are the ones in his day who really wanted to hear. The publicans, the tax collectors, the sinners wanted to crowd in around him and actually hear what he wanted to say. They wanted to hear what he had to say. It wasn't the scribes and the Pharisees. It wasn't the rich. It wasn't the powerful. You know what? Nothing's changed. That's still the kind of individual who actually wants to hear the word of God today. It's not the rich, for the most part. Some do. It's not the powerful, although some will. When you go out door knocking, I always like to go into the neighborhoods that were not rich, that were not affluent. Not that they didn't have a right to hear the truth, they did. But we knew that we would have more success going into the neighborhoods where people were even poor, were downtrodden, who needed some hope in their life. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. Jesus used the phrase numerous times, he that hath ears to hear, let him hear. You remember the 7 churches of Asia that we studied a while back? That was brought up again. He that hath ears to hear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. You've got ears I've given to you, use them to listen. Understand what's being taught. Swift to hear the word of grace, which is able to build you up and to give you an inheritance among all them which are sanctified or set apart, Acts 20:32. And we need to be swift. And also how we hear. Too many people do not hear with the proper understanding. If you've ever been working in the kitchen, cleaning or something like that, cooking something up, and you got some music playing, or the radio is on and people are talking, well, you can hear it, but do you really understand what they're saying? No. It's just background noise. We're not really listening with that understanding. But when it comes to God's holy word, we need to be quick to hear, quick to understand properly God's holy word. We talked about this morning, Acts chapter 17, verse 11. Those were more noble than those in Thessalonica. These were more noble than those in Thessalonica. in that they receive the word with all readiness of mind and search the scriptures daily whether those things were so, whether the things that Paul was teaching them were correct. Acts 17:11. But I always like to zero in on that readiness of mind. Their minds were open. Think of the saying, ready and willing. Well, they were ready, they were willing to hear what was going to be taught. Their minds weren't closed. Too many have ears that are dull of hearing, Matthew 13:15. Their ears are closed to the proper understanding. Sometimes when you're teaching someone or talking to someone about maybe a Bible passage, religion in general, maybe they attend a denomination somewhere, you work with them. When we talk about a certain passage that they don't agree with, even though it is found, as in Acts chapter 2, verse 38, they reject it. Because it's not something they've been taught. It's not something that their grandparents believed in. It's not something that their parents believed in. So it's not something they're going to believe in. Their ears are dull of hearing. It's closed. Very difficult to turn someone around who's in that kind of situation. That their mind is already made up. It is set. I've always heard when you go into a study with someone, especially who's a member of a denomination, to have a clear understanding and an agreement. We're going to open up the book and we're going to look at just what the Bible teaches. And we're going to be honest, which means if being honest, we realize the Bible is teaching us something that we've been taught before, we've never seen it, to be honest means we're going to accept it. Both have to come to that agreement. Sadly, a lot of times what you will find is someone, when they hear the truth on a subject, they will not remain honest. They will choose not to accept it. And of all people, we as Christians should be good listeners. I sometimes think that is a lost art. We don't really listen like we should. That is something we have to train ourselves to do. You're having a conversation with someone. This is something that's important to them. Listen. Yes, something will crop up into our minds that we have an answer for or we need to respond. Why don't we let them finish first? Truly listen to what they have to say. This is something I have to fight with all the day. Of course, I work with Denise, so I know you'll have some pity on me. I thought I'd get at least one amen from right over here. Okay, there we go. But that takes work. 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 11, study to be quiet and to do your own business. Study. Be diligent in living a peaceful, a quiet life. But it takes diligence for that. And to mind your own business. That's what that is saying, basically. Why are we to do this? Verse 12 gives us an answer, that ye may walk or live honestly toward them that are without, those who aren't Christians. Set the right example before them. It's also what we need to do. Always be setting the right example. You never know who's watching. Carla mentioned a while back that she hadn't been able to attend services for a while because of her situation. Her neighbor across the street realized that she wasn't going. People watch us when we leave. They do. I've had one tell me one time when I lived in Wyoming, well, you're going all the time. Well, it was all the time to her, but it wasn't to us. But people are always watching, and they are listening as well. Again, we're supposed to be slow to speak. Proverbs 29, verse 20, and Proverbs has a lot to say about our speech. James does too. James is sometimes referred to as the Proverbs of the New Testament, that gospel of common sense, which today is not so common anymore. But this passage reads, "Seest thou a man that is hasty in his words? There is more hope of a fool than of him." Wow. Pretty powerful. But if we heed the first part, we're going to be swift to hear. But in the second part, we're going to be just as quick, swift to answer, to speak. Where's the good come about from all of that? Where's the good seen? Where's the benefit in that? We have all heard the expression, "I didn't think before I spoke." That's impossible. You ever try it? You ever try to say something without thinking about it? It is impossible. Did we not necessarily think enough? Yes. We didn't think as long as we should on an answer. We need to be careful with the choice of our words. So many times the choice of our words reflect who we are, who we really are. And if our words are doing more damage than good, what does that say about us? The song that we sometimes sing, "Angry words, oh, let them never from the tongue unbridled slip. May the heart's best impulse ever check them, stop them, before they soil the lips." Wow. That sounds biblical, doesn't it? You can preach a sermon just on that hymn, that song. There was a rather notable saying during World War II, and it was for the Navy, and it was for the merchant marines at that time, especially leaving the ports in this country under difficult times, especially at the beginning of the war with all the U-boats out there. That saying was, "Loose lips sink ships." And that was true. You never knew who you might be talking to. It may be a spy for the enemy. And generally, orders on a ship, they weren't opened until the ship left port. Then the captain would read it for obvious reasons. But loose lips, they will also sink our souls if we're not careful. James has a lot to say about the tongue. This little member can set the world on fire if we're not careful. At our own world, need to be careful what we think, what we say. And it generally begins with what we think. Proverbs 13, verse 3. Again, Solomon wrote, "He that keepeth his mouth keepeth his life, but he that openeth wide his lips shall have destruction." I've mentioned this one before. One of my favorite sayings of Mark Twain is, "Better to let people think that you're a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt." That's true, isn't it? It is. With our mouths closed, we get ourselves into a lot less trouble than if we're always talking. And sometimes our judgment can be quick. Have you ever made some kind of judgment on things that you just only half heard or hearsay? You didn't hear the whole story. You may have heard what one individual told you, but you didn't go to the other person to find out the truth. And actually, they should be able to handle it between themselves. And if they can't, then go to the church. But it's possible that we can come to a wrong judgment because we never did get the whole truth behind a subject and information. Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. John 7:24. Being slow to speak can also help us to understand what our effects are upon another person. You've got a question, maybe a difficult one. If we're hasty in responding, we'll probably come up with the wrong answer. And sometimes, especially when it comes to talking about the scriptures, there's nothing wrong with saying, you know, I'm not sure about that, I will get back to you on it, than to just make something up. And generally the person that we say that to, you know, I'm not sure about that. Let me study it and I'll get back to you. They accept that. They can appreciate that. It's when we're hasty in a response to an answer, and it's definitely not wrong, and they look it up and they find out that we were wrong. But a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. Stir up anger, Proverbs 15:1. If you've been in any kind of form of law enforcement, and I found out that doesn't necessarily mean a police officer. You're just enforcing the law. They will train you, they will teach you the importance of de-escalation. Because someone comes in and they're in a bad mood and they're full of wrath to begin with, if you respond in kind, is fuel to a fire. But if you can actually ask them, why are you so upset? You know, a lot of times they'll tell you why. A lot of times they just want to be able to talk to someone about the situation. Did Jesus rail back when he was railed on? No, he didn't. Neither should we. And that's so easy to do, isn't it? No, it's not easy to do. But we can train ourselves to be that way. He that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame unto him, Proverbs 18:13. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt. Why? That ye may know how ye ought to answer every man, Colossians 4:6. How are we to answer? What did Paul state in Colossians 4:6? A response should be with grace. Our word should be with grace. Grace would be something that's delightful, loving, speech that's full of goodwill toward others, instead of harsh, curt, things that hurt people's feelings. Ours should be with grace. People should be able to see a difference between us and the world just by our speech. Our actions too, but our speech. It should be different. People will know there's something about that person. They're different. Seasoned with salt. I don't know about you folks, but I love salt. And yes, I know it's not good for me. But when I cook up something, and if it's not seasoned properly, it will get seasoned properly. I will put salt on it because I want it to taste good. Well, that's going to shorten your life. And What a shame to miss out on the good things of life. Life would just seem longer. But we use salt to season our food. Some places they still use it to preserve. Our speech should be seasoned with delightful things, with flavor, things that are pleasant, things that are uplifting. Being slow to speak and speaking well will, without a doubt, help us know how we are to answer everyone, every single person that we talk to. A question. There's something that's troubling us, and we need to confide in someone else what this problem is. Who would we like to confide in? An individual who's quick to hear what we have to say and will be slow to answer. In other words, they're going to really think about the question and give an answer that is correct. Would we rather go and confide in someone like that, or the other person? Someone we know they're not interested. They're not going to be quick to hear. Of course, we go to the person that is described in James chapter 1, verse 19. Brother Guyan Woods put it this way. He said the respect people are disposed to give to our opinions will depend largely on the amount of thought we give to the utterance of those opinions. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? And not the rapidity which we express them. Quick to hear, slow to speak, or slow to respond. In James chapter 1, verse 26, if any man among you seem or think that they are religious, and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain. It's worthless. It's empty. Being swift to hear, being slow to speak, will help us to be ready for this last part. Not being swift, not being quick to give into wrath, to rage. You think saying the wrong thing is bad, and it is. Doing the wrong things in so many ways is worse. Many today are under the illusion that it's a sin just to get angry. Something tells me that a lot of us this very day have sinned probably more than once. It's not a sin to get angry. It's how we handle that anger. Is some anger actually warranted while other forms of anger are condemned? Sure. How readeth thou the Scriptures? What does the Bible have to say on that topic? Well, one example is Moses. In departing Pharaoh for the last time, after Pharaoh had already told Moses that if I see your face again, I'm going to have you killed, Moses told him what that last plague was going to be. Moses knew the wrath of God that was coming down upon Pharaoh and Egypt. The firstborn son of every family, including the livestock, would die. But it states that he left in a great anger, Exodus 11, verse 8. Did he sin when he had that great anger? Doesn't say he did. There's the account of Jesus. Well, let's just go back to Mark chapter 3 for a second. Mark chapter 3, there was the man there on the Sabbath the synagogue who had a withered hand. Luke chapter 2, beginning verse 2. And they watched him. We know who they were. Those who wanted to catch him in some kind of sin, a trap. And they watched him whether he would heal on the Sabbath days, that they might accuse him. They'll find fault in him. And he saith unto the man which had the withered hand, stand forth. And he saith unto them, those who are watching, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day, or to do evil, to save life, or to kill? But notice it states, they held their peace. They didn't want to say. And when he looked round about on them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he saith unto the man, stretch forth thine hand, and he stretched it out, and his hand was restored whole as the other. He looked upon them with anger for the hardness of their hearts. Did he sin? No. That was not a sin. Another account is found in Matthew 21, verse 12. And Jesus went into the temple of God and cast out all them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers, and the seats of them that sold doves. Righteous anger. They had made the house of God into a den of thieves. In John's account, he even took the time to make a little whip, and he used it on them. Was that a sin? No, it was not. They should have known better. Righteous anger. He had it. Be ye angry and sin not, Ephesians 4:26. Well, that alone tells us that anger by itself is not a sin. Be ye not angry. But definitely don't sin if you do become angry. Righteous anger. Just don't let the sun go down upon your wrath, as the rest of that passage states. What does that mean? Have someone ever offended us, and then we had a hard time just giving it up, thinking about it? Well, let it go. Don't revel in it. Don't dwell in it. Don't wake up the next morning and your mind's focused on that grievance. You got to let it go. And that's what we should do. Why slow to wrath? For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. In the world of today, and it's a great question. It's a question that David asked before his fight with Goliath. He asked, is there not a cause? It's a good title for a sermon. Is there not a cause? When we think about this world that we live in, and it's not just this country, it's the world, does it ever make us angry with what is taking place? Does it make you angry when even in the Lord's church there are false teachers who are leading the members astray to a devil's hell? If that doesn't make you angry, you might already be dead. Does it make you angry with the denominations up and down this street, that they are leading their members who believe that what they're being taught is the truth? Does it make you angry that they're going to lose their soul on the day of judgment? It should. Very much so. Does it make us angry when the world and the country that we live in is more and more amoral? Not immoral. It's always been that. But I'm talking about amoral. You look it up in the dictionary, and it is defined as unconcerned with the rightness or wrongness of something. In other words, there's no longer right, there's no longer wrong. Anything goes. Brother Hatcher brought this up recently. I have to read this because it changes so often. The LGBTQ, that crowd. I'm sure there'll be a Y or a Z sooner or later. But that crowd, flaunting their godless agenda and not just wanting people to condone that, their evil ways, but demanding that the faithful do so. Does that ever make you angry? You remember Lot living amongst the Sodomites. They vexed his righteous soul day after day, watching those evil deeds. Doesn't it vex ours? Doesn't it make us angry? It should, if we really care. It will. I mentioned this before. See, one of the things good about preaching is you get to mention things more than once. There's a baker out in Lakewood, Colorado, one of the cities around Denver. He has been attacked by this crowd continuously, I want to say at least 10 years. He bakes wedding cakes, but he will not bake cakes for this crowd, for marriage, because his religion condemns that lifestyle. And he's not mean, he's not spiteful. And they have gone after him in one lawsuit after another. Even the state of Colorado agreed with this crowd. And it had to go before a higher court before some common sense came into play. But they will not leave that man alone until they get the verdict that they want, which will destroy him financially, end his career. This is who this crowd is. They're evil, with a capital E. Be ye angry and sin not. We live in the world, but we are not to be of the world. We're not to act, we're not to respond like they do. We cannot, because then we're like them. And as Christians, we lose the control of our speech, or we lose the control of our actions. We say or we do something we shouldn't. If it's a person that we're trying to bring to Christ, we've lost all credibility with that individual. Why would they ever respond? Why would they see the need to? Because we would be just like them. We'd be like everybody else in the world. And when that happens, Satan wins. You remember Cain? When he didn't offer the sacrifice that he'd been instructed to, he became very angry. God tried to talk some sense into him. That sin was at the door. What did he do? In Genesis 4, verse 8, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. Genesis 4, 8. The first murder. It was brother against brother. And you read the conversation that God had with Cain after, there's no remorse in Cain whatsoever. He didn't ask to be forgiven. Am I my brother's keeper? That was his attitude. Even Moses lost his temper with Israel. And if anyone had a right to lose his temper with that group, it was Moses. The meek, very meek man. But he lost his temper with them. He smote the rock twice, Numbers 20, verse 11, instead of speaking to it. And it cost him to enter into the promised land. He sinned, gave in to it. As it's too late to take back an ill-spoken word, it's also too late. We can't take back bringing wrath upon someone. We can have remorse. We can wish that we had never committed it. We can ask that individual or individuals to forgive us, but it won't be forgotten. The damage is done. So better to be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. To speak slow, to think about what we're actually going to say, to put some thought into it. And better to be slow to wrath than to do something that's going to bring shame on the bride of Christ. As much as people hear what we say, they also watch what we do. How are we doing this afternoon? These are some words to live by. Again, you all know what this says. This is just a reminder. I need to hear them as much as anybody does. Some of you may think, well, he really needs to hear that. But how are we doing? If it's a case that we need the prayers of the church on our behalf this afternoon, why not make things right with him? Let's all stand and sing.